From We First and Goal 17 Media, welcome to Lead with We. I'm Simon Mannering, and each week I get to speak with top business leaders and founders about the revolutionary mindsets and methods they use to build their bottom line and a better future for all of us by leading with we. Today I'm talking with Tobias Peggs, the co-founder and CEO of Square Roots. Now, Square Roots is an indoor urban farming company that is transforming how food is grown and distributed in the US in truly exciting ways. Now, Tobias comes from the tech world. He has a PhD in machine learning and has worked with many successful startups. So I'm really excited to talk with him about the intersection of technology and the local food movement, plus so much more. Tobias, welcome to Lead with We.
Thank you very much.
Tobias, machine learning, local food, bridge that gap for me. That's like an Evel Knievel leap.
Yeah, it's perfect training to be a farmer, right? It's as it happens, there is a data science reason as to why I ended up in food. One of my previous tech companies was acquired by probably the world's largest retailer. And as part of that acquisition, I was working there for a year. And one of the projects that they had me do was study global grocery buying behaviors.
This was Walmart. Was it Walmart?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And as a data scientist, what I saw there was pretty scary, honestly. Right? Obviously at Walmart scale, you've got 300 million customers or whatever they've got buying their groceries, every day. That's a lot of data.
That's a lot of data.
And as I found out, that's a lot of bananas flying all over the world.
Flying in and flying out. I can only imagine.
Yeah. And you sort of realize, or you begin to think about the impact on the planet of that transport. As food is traveling, nutrients are breaking down, so maybe the quality of the food isn't so good at the end of long supply chains as it would be for local food. And then I began to sort of see you talk to customers and, don't really have any idea of where their food comes from.
Exactly.
That kind of sense of community around food was just lost. And so that was the spark of the idea for me. I was thinking, well, listen, people want food from all over the world. Like, that's not going to change. But instead of shipping food from one part of the world to the other, how about we shipped environmental data from one part of the world to the other?
Right.
And then we could recreate climates that were perfect for growing all sorts of foods, but recreate those climates in your backyard, right? In a local zip code, in the same zip code as the end consumer. And so you could grow food from all over the world, which is what people want, but get it to the retail store the same day that it's harvested. And that was kind of the original idea for Square Roots.
So, connect the dots because, for many of us, we know what AI or machine learning is. You've talked about sort of agricultural data, but how does it all fit together? How does it work? What role does that play? How did it make this idea not just a great idea, but make it possible?
Sure. Yeah. So I think specifically at Square Roots, it's helpful to understand the architecture of what we're building, right? So I'll give some buzzwords here, but we're basically building a network of cloud-connected modular farms. These environments that I talked about that are good for growing food, we create those environments inside upcycled shipping containers.
Okay.
Right. So think of a 40-foot shipping container, and that's teched out, and inside that container then is the perfect environment for growing a certain crop.
Right.
We can locate that container or clusters of them as it happens in any zip code across the country or across the world, right? Now, inside those farms, then we're growing the food and we've got it the perfect climate, but we're also capturing data every single second as to what is happening inside that box, right? The temperature, the humidity, the nutrients at the end of a harvest cycle, what was the yield like, what was the taste, what was the texture. And that data is being captured in every single box, right? Every container that we have across the network. What beautifully happens then is that, if in one particular box a farmer did something, or we changed an environmental parameter that increased the yield or reduced the resources that we need, our learning systems will spot that information from the data and then push that new instruction across the whole network.
Rapid
so it's almost
prototyping.
like the whole network is learning how to farm better as we go about building the business.
That's amazing because you're not only solving for the need, but you're iterating and rapid prototyping the whole time to up level the whole system. And I mean, I want people to really hear what you're sharing, which was it all started by a very, very, like an undeniable need that you saw in terms of the inefficiencies and the logistics and the shipping of all the produce that comes in every day.
Mm-hmm.
But then, the ambition you had as an entrepreneur was massive to just revolutionize the way that we think about food supply and localizing it. So there was no limit on your ambition. But then how did you go from that idea? I know you're partnered with Kimball Musk. How did you go from that idea to execution? Because when you've got a huge idea like that, sometimes it's intimidating. You go, well, great idea, but I can never do that. So where did you start?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because, as we started to sit there and dream about what this business would be at scale, we saw that we had these modular farms in every city, in every country across the world. And that is the way that we're able to, think about feeding every consumer on the planet with locally grown food.
Right.
And there was a big missing piece of the puzzle as we thought about that, which is we knew there would not be enough farmers to hire to be able to staff all of those farms. Okay. And that quickly led us actually to like the second really fundamental sort of pillar of purpose, if you like, around the business, which is to provide pathways for young people to come into the farming industry and become the future leaders. And there's a big need there, right? The average age of a farmer in the United States is 58 years old.
Wow.
So as well as all of the problems with the food system that are somewhat understood now, it's a big greenhouse gas contributor. 70% of food that we eat has got trace pesticides in it. 40% of food from industrial systems is just wasted. We can go on and on and on about the problems. In addition, there is a demographic time bomb that is about to detonate across our food system, which is who the hell is going to grow all the food when our current farmers retire in 5 or 10 years' time? Right?
Never thought of that. Never. Yeah, right.
It's huge. So we knew that we had to go figure out a way to bring, young people into the industry and train them quickly so that they could be, not just productive farmers, but feel very enthused about a career in a completely new industry for them. So the first thing that we did as a business was prove to ourselves that we could train young people to be farmers.
Right.
And we put a platform together, hardware and software that enabled us to do that. And 12 months after starting the company, we had trained 10 young people, many of whom had never even grown a houseplant before, and they were capable of growing this really, really, really tasty food.
They must have been thrilled. They must have been did the reaction? What was their reaction?
It was wild. I mean, we had, a guy who was an investment banker who, was bored sitting behind a spreadsheet all day long and quit his job to, join Square Roots because he wanted to make an impact on the world, who was growing like the most delicious kale, that you've ever tasted in your life, sort of 6 months after making that transition. It was just magic to see.
That's powerful stuff. I mean, it's really powerful. And I get a sense that you've got these modular farms, but it's almost like a network of distribution of locally grown produce. Where's the hub? Do you have centers around the country that then look after these various sort of modular farms? How does the structure work?
Yeah, sure. It's actually a fully distributed model, right? So when we think about deploying a farm in a new city, obviously we want to make sure there's demand in that city. Is it big enough to, frankly, buy the food that we're growing? What we like to do is deploy like clusters of these modular farms together so that there's some kind of operational scale and the business economics work. But then that farm serving that market runs as its own kind of independent business entity sat on top of a standard technology platform. And so again, go back to the sort of, customer proposition away from the sort of buzzwords that I'm using. If you are a customer in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and you come across Square Roots, then Square Roots is your local farm. You can drive to the farm, you can meet the farmers. The food that you buy on the supermarket shelf was grown in your zip code and was harvested 24 hours ago. If you are a Square Roots customer in New York City, same thing. New York City is your local farm. You can jump on a subway, go to the farm, meet the farmers, the whole thing. It's a very consistent experience, right? Because those consumer experiences are sat on top of this very, very scalable platform of technology and data and process and the whole thing, but the consumer experience is a hyper local one.
That's fantastic. I mean, because the credibility of the brand, but also the integrity of your product turns on that. Their ability to sort of see the new version of what farming looks like. Let me ask you, when you actually kind of took this to scale, when you were taking it to market, there must have been obstacles in the way from a technology point of view, or even from an agricultural point of view. Like, isn't there a certain constitution of soil that certain types of crops or plants require, or certain climatic conditions that are very hard to recreate in a small space like a container? Like, how did you think through these microcosms you're building?
Yeah, it is interesting. Actually, honestly, the first challenge, though, was just to convince people that we weren't insane. Right? You can imagine the pitch. Hey,
I love that. I love that. Like, first job, we are not insane. Right. Mission accomplished. Thank you very much. There we go.
You can imagine the pitch. All right, we're going to take these young people who've never grown any food before and put them in a metal box in a parking lot in Brooklyn. And, they're going to grow the most amazing food you've ever tasted in your life. Like, people thought we were nuts. So, once we'd proven that, then we got on with other challenges. But in terms of, some of the things that you talk about, I'll answer it from the specific question of like, what types of things can we grow in the farm?
Sure.
And it's not really a question of capability. In the sort of 3 years we've been up and running with our farming system, we've grown probably 400 different varieties of crops, like herbs, leafy greens.
There's certain basics crops, and staples,
like strawberries,
and so on.
Tomatoes. I mean, we've grown turnips and eggplants and all sorts of stuff. The question is really economics, right? What can you grow and get to market at a competitive price? And to put it in its simplest terms, the heavier the vegetable you're trying to grow, the more energy is required to grow that vegetable, and so the more expensive it becomes, right? Photosynthesis, that plant growing, is basically the plant taking energy from a light source and converting that into biomass, right? Our light source is artificial light, it's LEDs. We do that so we have perfect year-round control, and there's the exact amount of energy going into the plant. But of course, that costs money. Sure. Right, so I can grow you turnips today, but there's so much biomass there that it's going to take so much energy, it doesn't make sense. Whereas things like herbs and leafy greens and the small fruiting crops, tomatoes, strawberries, that's all very, very possible with the system today. But this is where the sort of data science and the technology sort of marries, right? Which is, if I'm an outdoor farmer, I can't suddenly look at the sun and make it twice as efficient and reduce my costs or double my yield. Whereas as an indoor farmer, I can do that, right?
So you're not bettering nature. You're modeling it. You're modeling off it and optimizing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So over the way I sort of think about it is, walk into a supermarket, your favorite supermarket, line up every single fruit and vegetable from the lightest to the heaviest. And that's essentially our product roadmap for the next 20 years.
Wow. I mean, and, with a diminishing amount of arable land in the world and unsustainable agricultural practices, it might sound like a science fiction leap what you're doing, but it's absolutely critical. And, how intentional were you about your purpose in the first place? Like, what is the purpose of Square Roots, and how do you articulate that? And did you start with that and then build a business model out of it, or did you reverse engineer out of just this solution to the need?
We started with it actually. I mentioned there were sort of two. After sort of me and Kimball came up with the idea and we got the initial funding. There were two of us in a WeWork office, kind of getting the thing up and running. And literally, the first thing we did was put together a mission statement and a set of core values.
Awesome.
And what we sort of said was, listen, if we're going to sign up to work for this company for the next 20 years, let's make it a company we want to get out of bed for every single day. Let's really believe in the mission and the purpose. And then let's create a culture, codified by this set of values that we really enjoy being in, right? So if we've got that done, okay, now this is the mission of the company, and this is how it's going to feel as we're sort of, approaching that mission over the next decades, right? Now go build a company that, is doing that and feels like that on a daily basis.
No, you need to build that brand because, you need a great product and a great story. So what is the mission of the company? What are those values?
Sure. Yeah. So the mission of the company, as it's articulated, is to bring locally grown food to people in cities all across the world, and do that while empowering the next generation of leaders in urban agriculture.
Right. Right. And the values that define the culture and how you want to show up in the world?
Yeah, so there's a set of about 12 or 14. We have values and MOs. And we don't have to go through all of those now, but
Sure.
You're right. They basically codify how we show up for each other, how we show up for our customers, how we show up for ourselves, essentially.
And did you get any pushback, from the whole idea of, you're still answering the same need as traditional farmers, but in some way it's kind of like Uber coming into the taxi business. There's a whole other way of doing things. And does that sort of cannibalize those that work on the land or, the generational families that have been there? Was there any sensitivity around that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm certainly not going to sit here and say that 100% of food that we eat in the future is all going to be grown in indoor farms. I just don't believe. I don't believe that's
Right.
a right thing to do. I don't believe, that will happen. In parallel, we work very closely with soil-based farmers who have got millennia of experience,
Sure.
growing this food, and we're growing the same food, right?
Right.
It might be indoors and we're creating the environment, but they're growing basil, we're growing basil. They're growing kale, we're growing kale. There's a lot that we can learn there and should do, right? And we're very open to taking advice and listening. I'll give you an example. A good technique in organic farming is known as integrated pest management. Right. Where a farmer might release beneficial insects onto the crop that essentially are eating the nasty insects that we don't want. Right? We use exactly that technique inside the farm. So we'll release beneficial insects as part of an IPM program, which is almost a one-for-one parallel with what an organic farmer is doing. Right. It would be ridiculous if we didn't sit down and talk with organic farmers about how they do that and their best practices. Right? So I think that's a good example. What I would say is that the farmers that we work with are very much on the same sort of mission, which is how do we get people more connected with where their food comes from? How do we build that sense of community around food? And I think the sort of common enemy, if you like, is the industrial food system.
Sure.
That's shipping in food from thousands of miles away where we've got no idea where it's come from, and it's not particularly good for the planet or the people.
And I mean, the commodities markets themselves, you hear that, the prices go up, they go down, they're affected by natural disasters, there's waste, and food is dumped each year. Does this help provide a better control system for the amount of food that's produced?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, if you are a field farmer, you need to overplant to, hedge against nature. You can have a biblical hailstorm, drop on our farm and doesn't make any difference, right? Because we're all indoors, right? Whereas if that happens outdoors, you've lost all of your crop, right? So, farmers are overplanting, then, food in the industrial food system, farmers are overplanting, food is traveling for weeks on end in trucks being bounced around. A lot of that's getting destroyed. Then it gets to the supermarket, and the supermarket will reject it if it doesn't look pretty enough because they don't think they can sell it, right? And then consumers, especially in America, will overconsume, and there's food waste at the end of the week. So in all, if you look at the American industrial food system, 40% of the food that we grow is wasted along that supply chain.
It's unbelievable, right?
With square roots, because we're indoor, there's a lot of precision, a lot of control. We can grow food for demand. We don't need to overplant, right? For every seed that goes in, I know exactly how much food is coming out at the end of the day. Because the supermarkets that we work with are, in many cases, like within 2 or 5 miles of the farm, the food's getting there the next day. There's no food waste on the way. And then the shelf life of the product, because it's only taken a day to get to the farm, is extraordinary. So there's very little waste. The estimates that we've done on our system, we think we have a 3% waste across our chain versus a 40% waste in the industrial food system. So it's night and day difference.
Yeah, I mean, that's crazy. I mean, and I mean, if you're responding to a need as big as this, then so are others. And I mean, we hear things about vertical farming. You see, genetic modifications that increase crop yield out of the same amount of soil or land. Like, what does competition look like as you sort of step into this huge opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, vertical farming, controlled climate agriculture, high-tech farming, like the world that we're in, is definitely a sort of hot industry right now.
Yep.
Every week there's a new announcement of some new farm or some new mega funding round that's happened. It's very exciting, but it's still very, very, very early, right? Food is a $12 trillion industry, and there's like 20 companies that have raised a bunch of money that are doing this stuff in America, right? We're a tiny, tiny, tiny part of an absolutely ginormous market right now. We're also very collaborative, actually. I know pretty much every founder or CEO of every indoor farming company that's there, and there's remarkable alignment around that mission. Everybody understands that we got to change the food system, and if we're helping each other out, it's better for all of us. I think the other thing that's going on with indoor farming, it actually reminds me of the internet in the early 90s, right? It's like, we know this thing is inevitable, but no one can quite yet tell you what shape it's going to take in the future, right? And indoor farming is kind of like that, right? There's a bunch of us that are crazy enough to jump in because it is inevitable, and we're all kind of helping each other figure out how this eventually feeds every consumer, in the world.
And how do you address misperception by consumers that this is frankenfood, it's wild science? Like, how do you show with transparency that this has not only the same taste experience, which is half the battle won, but the same quality and integrity as what they get from a local farm?
Yeah, transparency is obviously key, right? If you ask any consumer what they want from the food system, it's more transparency. Where did my food come from? Do I trust that this is food I want to be feeding my kids tonight? That's the number one question. The current industrial system is so opaque, it's kind of hard to see that. So we kind of baked this idea of transparency right into, not just the core values, but into the physical product. So on the hardware side, the farms themselves, we have massive windows at the end of the farms. Right. So if you're walking by in the neighborhood, you can just have a look in.
It's like, the room where all the babies are in the hospital. You can go in and say, which one's ours, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Oh, that's my basil. I will buy that tomorrow.
That's my basil.
And then because of the whole thing's cloud connected and we're tracking data every step of the way. And again, how can that benefit the consumer? On every package of Square Root's product, there's a QR code that you can scan, which will pop open a mobile web page on your phone that will show you the complete story of where your food came from seed to shelf. And it will show you pictures along the way, the picture of the farmer who, harvested it yesterday, and you can click on that and learn more about that farmer. So even if you can't physically get to the farm, we're still providing that, complete sort of transparency and then also, of course, traceability of the product, to the consumer at the supermarket shelf.
I mean, that's so powerful because, consumers aren't just conscious today. They can be equally punitive. They're like, if you're not doing the right thing and if you're not defensible, then we're going to call you out. And that's interesting because there's, alternatives out there like SourceMap that would, allow you to see the supply chain of a product, which would give you some sense of confidence that it came from the right place and there wasn't unnecessary carbon footprint and so on. But you're taking that all out of the equation. You're localizing the production outright, so you don't even need to worry about all of that. Do you find, when you go to build the business now as an entrepreneur, is the mission itself, much like we saw with sort of Elon Musk and Tesla, is the mission itself so compelling people come to you, or do you need to go out and find people to work with you and sort of sell them in on the vision and help them understand, the technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. What I will say is that we use that mission and our values to ensure that there's alignment with a partner or with a new hire. As we think about scaling the business, we obviously want to scale the culture as well and make sure that we're building, a fantastic organization at scale that is doing the right thing, quote unquote, as part of its DNA.
Right.
And so we're very, very deliberate, as I said, on things like hiring or thinking about partners that we work with to really do our due diligence and make sure there's mission and values alignment. If that's not there on day one, you're going to quickly get off track and things are going to just feel harder. When a new hire or a new partner that you're working with is like trying to fix the food system and trying to bring this idea of real local food to people. There are going to be bumps in the road. There are going to be things that don't go quite right. But if there's that shared sort of purpose and a shared articulation of what the mission is, then you bash through those things and you make that happen. It's a very powerful multiplier.
And when you think back to that initial moment of insight where you thought, what's wrong with this picture, when you were doing all of that logistic work before and you saw the waste and so on, if you build on that, like, what does the future of food look like in your mind, Tobias? What can we imagine 10 years down the track? What do you think it'll look like?
Yeah, I think the food system has to become a lot more responsible, sustainable, whatever word you put on that. The current food system, it cannot feed the near future world, which has 10 billion people, 70% living in urban areas that are not near these industrial farms. Like the problems that we have today with transport and all those things only get worse in the very immediate future. There's an obligation to fix that, but I also think the consumer's not going to stand for that food system any longer, right? And you see this in the numbers, right? Organic food in the US, which is kind of a label for what people think is a better for you system. And there are some issues with it, but let's put those aside for now. Organic food has gone from essentially zero when I came to the US 15 years ago to, $25, $30 billion industry right now. And that's all driven by the consumer saying there has to be a better way, right? So I think that mega trend is happening. I also think it's been accelerated by COVID, right? Because overnight, people were forced to stay at home and cook. And so you get more curious about the food that you're buying and you observe how long it lasts in your refrigerator and you find out why. You get a bit more educated about where your food is coming from, right? So all these things are helping. And then, of course, technology advances, making lighting systems more efficient, which is essentially meaning we're able to bring down our cost or grow a wider array of products. All of those things are combining. So we are, as the Americans would say, right at the early inning of indoor farming here.
Right.
We're just getting started.
And I love the breadth of your ambition, in terms of triangulating a growing population, the climate crisis, and taking on the ills of the industrial food system as it stands. It's a real powerful example of just how big an ambition can be, which also, I have enormous respect for how crazy you are for taking it on in the first place and executing against it, because we need that, we just need that sort of bravery right now. We need that courage to step into these great needs and to enable these industries and to create these companies and to sort of support the peers, because that's the only way we're going to meet these challenges with greater speed and equal force. So Tobias, really appreciate sharing the insights. Much respect for what Square Roots is doing. And, where should we go to find out more? What's your website?
Sure. Yeah. We're very active on social. You can follow us on Instagram or Twitter or wherever else at Square Roots Grow. And then our website is squarerootsgrow.com. One of the things we list on our website is dates for future farm tours. Now, we have not had too many farm tours in the last 12 months. So
book your farm tour now.
I would be very, very, very happy for everyone to sign up to the first farm tour. Not only do I want to see you, but that means the world is a much, much better place than it has been.
I agree. Think of it. It's the perfect first date. I'm taking you on a farm tour. Thanks so much for your time, Tobias. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Lead with We. You can find more information about Tobias and Square Roots in the show notes to this episode. Lead with We is produced by Goal 17 Media. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe to this channel here on YouTube by clicking the red button below. That way you'll never miss an opportunity to learn from our guests and apply their insights to your business. And you can also listen to each episode of Lead with We on Apple, Google, or Spotify. I'll see you next week, and until then, let's all lead with we.